Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Olo and today I have a bit of an informative style video for you. Basically, I've recently been pushing higher and higher tier Nightmare Dungeons. The higher you go, the more glyph XP you get, the more consistent rewards at the end, which seem to be reliable sources of legendaries and in turn uniques. Did you know, further, that Nightmare Dungeon drops actually have a higher chance of being sacred or ancestral compared to drops elsewhere? That was actually confirmed recently by the associate game director, so there you go. Further, they've talked about improving the rewards, increasing the XP for Nightmare Dungeons, and hopefully more ways based on the recent campfire talk. But first, we should talk about today's sponsor, Opera GX. Take control of your PC performance with a web browser that's made for gamers. From zero to hero in a matter of seconds, you can use Opera GX's quick import tool to make swapping browsers really easy. This import tool allows for quick importing of all your settings from a previous browser to GX, down to all the details. Bring your browser history, bookmarks, cookies, and it's even compatible with every Google Chrome extension. Add 10 to your cool attribute by modding up the experience. With endless customization available, you can create your very own vibe while browsing or make it easy with GX mods. With just one click, you can flip your entire browser 180, able to change pretty much everything you want. These allow you to change your wallpaper, theme colors, or add some sounds to your experience. Pick from a selection of background music, keyboard sounds, or browser sounds. So pick one of the many mods or create your own to suit you best. It may have taken Sam and Frodo a whole trilogy to complete their task in Middle-earth, but you can bring back control to your PC in a matter of a few clicks. Using GX Control, you can enhance the performance of your PC, managing just how much CPU and RAM GX can use at any one time. Perfect for when you've got lots of tabs open, but don't want that to impact your game's performance. So upgrade your browsing experience with Opera GX, click the link in the video description, and download today. And a big thank you to Opera GX for supporting the channel. In any case, Nightmare Dungeons are important, and they're going to make them more important. Pushing higher tiers, of course, serves a purpose, and we're all going to be kind of reaching that true endgame before too long. In that, you're going to be facing harder and harder enemies, and you're going to quickly reach a point where they simply one-shot you if you don't have the right setup. Are you actually building for the challenging content? Do you have the right stats, paragons, the right affixes? There's a lot to consider. It might be confusing, but today I'm going to give you my overview so you know what to think about to push that harder true endgame content. As a heads up here, I'm in a Necromancer. This is my Necromancer. As a class, it's certainly the worst in terms of mobility, and it's generally considered that it needs some sort of attention beyond what it has for that mobility, and also inbuilt survivability, which it doesn't really have. The reason I'm still surviving despite that in higher tier dungeons is because of my build, my playstyle, and the knowledge of how things work. That's how it was able to clear a 100 Nightmare Dungeon solo, and it still soloed Uber Lilith as a class, so it's possible. There's not really any excuse for a Necromancer or any class. We'll begin with the all-important one, our aspects and our armor stat. Armor is pretty much the most impactful stat that you can have across all of your equipment. The more you have, the less physical damage taken from enemies of equal level by this percent, which is honestly pretty much a lie. This caps out at 85% reduction, which is pretty insane, right? 85% physical damage is next to immune to damage. But the truth is, as it says there, equal level, you actually lose armor percentage in the reduction of that physical damage as you face an enemy one level higher than you, or 10 or 50. But armor does undeniably massively reduce the physical damage you take. And you know, a lot of the best aspects and a lot of the best paragon points and so on, these reduce the damage you're taking by say 10% or even 20%, and those are considered incredible. So even a 30% reduction is still a lot. So armor is really valuable, and there are many ways to get it. Take your chest piece as a great example. This has a lot of armor on it, and of course as you upgrade it and have higher item power, you're going to have more armor. But as you can see, I have pretty much the universally best defensive aspect on it, which is disobedience. As you can see, it gains armor as we deal damage in combat, stacking up to 50% times in this case. So basically, as I deal damage, that stacks up and up, and it raises my armor number here by a massive amount, getting me easily over 10k and so on, and reaching the cap. So universally, this is the best aspect to get some raw defense for every class and every build, in my opinion, and it's so strong that I reckon it's probably going to get nerfed. The way they nerf things is a bit harsh, and I really hope that they buff things to, you know, give us other options when this is no longer the king, but for now, it's easily the strongest defensive aspect. There are other universal aspects that are great, like the might aspect here. Causes our basic to grant 20% damage reduction for an amount of time. This means every time you use a basic, you refresh it, getting that 20% damage reduction. That's flat flat damage reduction, so this is amazing. And this is in fact one of the core aspects that the Necromancer that soloed Uber Lilith was using. So as we reach true endgame, this will actually be a very meta-relevant aspect in my opinion. There are also aspects that enhance your core abilities. Take Bone Storm here. This reduces the damage I take while active thanks to an enhancement by 15%. That's amazing, and something I'm going to be using in most builds due to just how powerful this ultimate is. But then you take something like the Shielding Storm aspect for a Necromancer, well that takes that already amazing ability we use in most our builds and then gives it a 5% barrier of our base life, giving a major damage reduction and other benefits for the barrier being up. You might not play a Necromancer, you might not be using Bone Storm, but there's probably a version of this for one of your key abilities. The universal average though is to have at least 3 defensive aspects on your gear. In my case, I have Disobedience and I have the Shielding Storm. Then I've got Ghost Walk for utility and mobility, and I've got Explosive Mist, which reduces the cooldown of pretty much my main damage avoidance ability, Blood Mist. So you could argue, and I will argue, that I have 4 defensive aspects right now. At level 81, I was pushing a tier 60 while carrying Cotton, my friend, who I'm helping level his new Barbarian. So I'm dealing with enemies that are 33 levels higher than me. They're stronger as a whole, including having more health because I've got a second person doing nothing in the dungeon, and it's still possible for me because of my setup and the way that I'm playing it. But those are some concepts to know about in regards to aspects and armor. What about something seemingly pretty ignored, which would of course be the aspect of resistances? I'm pretty much ignoring this entirely, and that is because resistances suck. They just don't provide enough in the current version of the game. This has been confirmed by the people in charge and running the game and balancing it. In that recent campfire sort of chat, they talked about resistances have basically been a lot less valuable than they'd like them to be, and you'll see like the top players that are pushing the hardest content just completely ignore it. You could argue that, you know, okay, we're facing a really tough end boss that's like all about poison, so you stack poison resist. But this game doesn't really have single target final fights. The world bosses are just pushovers. Until there's some sort of extreme version of these bosses comparable to Uber Lilith, that's just not a concern. As a long-term fix and change to resistances, they promised that we will see that around season 2. So it'll be quite some time before resistances matter at all. Now let's talk about affixes, the stats and skills that are on your equipment. You can see that you can have 4 on each individual thing, and the chest piece and the legs are great examples of that, usually involving things that are going to give you survivability, especially on the legs, where it's pretty much all going to be that. Ultimately, there's a priority that you're going to look for when it comes to defensive affixes on your gear. In my opinion, armor and maximum life or max health are going to be the most impactful ones you can get. You will get a massive amount of maximum life when you stack that up, and if you didn't know, if you put it on say your jewelry, it seems to have the highest potential numbers out of all of your pieces. In any case, there are other examples of great defensive affixes on your gear. A great example and a major one is damage reduction for enemies that are affected by some sort of damage over time. This is a shadow damage based build, and so you can see here it's reducing the damage that enemies deal to me when affected by that shadow damage over time by up to 13.7%. But there are other versions of this that are consistent, like damage reduction as a whole, just straight up, damage reduction to close enemies and also far enemies, further damage reduction when you're fortified. All of these are good options, and having a nice strong roster of them is great, but my opinion is that max life and armor are probably the best overall, followed by just straight damage reduction of any kind. And also you can see my gems in my gear. In the case of my armor, a very common thing for me is to just improve my max life because I just rate that so highly. The only other thing that I will try to get on this will be armor, and that's where jewelry comes in with the skulls, because that does exactly that. Up to 250 armor on a gem right now is a lot. 750 total just from these 3 slots is a lot of armor. But while we're standing here, I should also mention barriers. For example, damaging elite grants you a barrier absorbing up to a certain amount for 10 seconds. This is actually a very good defensive aspect you could consider, but I rate it so much lower than raw armor that I would not prioritize this. There is a unique legendary, Temerity, here that is all about barriers, and it's something I've used quite a bit, getting you up to 80% of your maximum life lasting for 8 seconds of a barrier that triggers when you overheal. This on paper is actually amazing and does work really good in certain Necromancer builds, because we have something called the Blood Orb that spawns as we kill enemies in different builds. We pick loads of them up. We have this barrier like all the time. time. That's very nice. But the affixes, if you take a look, are terrible. Potion drop rate, chance to heal. Improving healing received is not terrible for a blood or healing build, but for most people it is. It's missing some of the really key defensive affixes. And you know, like I said, the legs, these are often associated to most of your defensive affixes or some of your best options. So to lose that on such a key component, it's really bad. Barriers just absorb damage from all sources, up to the certain amount that they actually have the health to do so, and it only lasts a certain amount of time, which I think is the worst part of it. Even a good barrier just fades after like 5 to 10 seconds, which sucks. So yeah, working them into your build sort of passively as a secondary or third defensive priority is perfectly fine, but they're definitely a lower tier of damage mitigation compared to other options. Then there's also things like Elixirs that we're running all the time anyway for the 5% XP, but the different versions of them. As you can see, pretty much the overall best is going to be Heady Iron Barb for me because it improves your armor by 500. That's 2 of those skull gems. Like I said, I think resistances are a bit of a trap because it's just not effective or nearly as effective as it should be. So armor is going to be the most consistent, but it's also perfectly reasonable and viable to pick offensive elixirs over defensive. But if you're looking to survive and you're getting next to one shot, yeah, Iron Barb is going to be a great way to prevent that. Now we should talk about class stuff in general when it comes to, say, Paragon and your skill tree. For Paragon, there are major damage reduction things, like, hey, 10% damage reduction against close enemies. Or like this, when you or your minions deal shadow damage to an enemy, that enemy deals 2% reduced damage, stacking up to 10%. Paragon boards are a great way to get survivability, and you're going to want at least 2 or maybe more defensive ones at a certain point. When it comes to your skill tree, defensive main abilities are obviously obvious picks, but there are really powerful passives that we should all have, like Necromancer's Death Embrace that has 9% damage taken from those that are close to me. Or standalone here with a sacrifice build where I have no minions, I have 18% straight damage reduction. Necromancer has this kind of insane ability called Decrepify here, where you apply it to an enemy, and for roughly 10 seconds, they're going to be dealing 20% or more less damage to you. A major damage reduction that I pretty much permanently apply to all enemies I'm fighting. It also slows them, meaning I can play at range and prevent them from dealing damage to me if they're melee. Corpse Tendrils in my build here is how I kind of almost permanently have enemies stunned, so what's better than reducing the damage you take, completely stopping it. As we go higher into those tiers of content, it becomes more and more obvious that even the weakest enemies are next to one-shotting you. Making it so that they aren't one-shotting you gives you a fighting chance, at which point you can hard CC or manage through skill and gameplay to either reduce the damage by a lot or completely stop it. But there you have it. That's my overview of how to survive in Diablo. In recap, armor is the most important damage reduction stat for me, and it's easy to get through gems on your jewelry, defensive affixes on your chest or your legs in particular, and the all-important disobedience aspect that really we're all going to be running until they nerf it. Max health is also insanely strong alongside other damage reduction affixes like reducing damage to close enemies or those affected by your main damage over time. Resistances, I believe, are more of a trap right now, but they do claim to improve and rework them for season 2. It's good they've acknowledged them, but wow, why so long is my question. Barriers in terms of damage reduction are nice, but can be a trap if you lean too hard into them due to their temporary nature, and uniques like Temerity, which come with terrible affixes, not providing enough damage reduction for the highest tier content. Good bonuses, not a main focus. Lastly, remember to use your class talents, paragons, and potentially class uniques to further reduce damage where you can. Playstyle and managing fights will come down to your skill, but at the highest levels of content, you need to minimize incoming damage as much as possible to the point where you're even not taking any. I would say as a bare minimum, 3 defensive aspects in a build will become baseline at a certain point, and more for the true endgame real challenges. If you have any extra details or advice for players pushing higher tiers or harder content, then maybe drop it in the comments, you might help someone. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.